Whoa, they're making a Tales of the Jedi series? Cool! Oh wait, it's got Ahsoka in it. Don't tell me it's Filoni spewing her around again. Yep. Okay, my excitement has ceased to be. Everyone should know that Tales of the Jedi is not an original name Filoni came up with. As a fake-ass lore buff, he stole the name from the rightful 90s comics, created by the late Tom Veitch, and published by Dark Horse Comics. The show's name isn't original, but the specific product is a story for another time. Let's talk about the real Tales of the Jedi series. From what I understand, the original idea for Tales of the Jedi was Anakin Skywalker's backstory, but George Lucas, who was still deciding on whether or not to make the prequel trilogy, shot that idea down and told them instead to make it about ancient Jedi. After that, it was up to them to decide the story. That's how I heard it anyways. I've heard accounts that say that was never the case and that the pitch was originally about ancient Jedi in the first place and George approved it with flying colours. Either way, the story ended up being about the connected story of ancient Jedi from the Old Republic. The Old Republic era started with these comics. Before Knights of the Old Republic, there was Tales of the Jedi. Now, originally I covered the first volume of Tales of the Jedi, but never got around to doing the other volumes. For this video, I wanted to do the entire lot, so that means a re-review of the first volume. With that being said, let's talk about the series. Published from 1993 to 1998, Tales of the Jedi are, as before mentioned, a connected story concerning legendary ancient Jedi of the Old Republic. The first two arcs focus on the Jedi named Ulic Qel-Droma and Nomi Sunrider. I'll be reviewing the series as it's presented in order of release. So first, we've got Ulic Qel-Droma and the Beast Riders. Given this arc is heavily referenced in Knights of the Old Republic 2, the main appeal of this arc for me was soaking up the references. As the story goes, Jedi Master Archer Jeth sends Ulic Qel-Droma, his brother Kay, and a Twi'lek named Tot Danita to Onderon. The first few pages establish the friendship between the three before being sent on a mission to the planet of Onderon to get the system to join the Galactic Republic, since there are still systems that haven't decided to join up yet. Here we get the backstory of Onderon, how two factions, the Royalty and the Beast Riders, are at each other's necks for generations, and how the Beast Riders learn to survive outside the city walls, hence the name. The backstory is a little crammed in, but it's forgivable given they're trying to set up the story. With that being said, the trio travel to Onderon's capital city, Isis. After being ambushed by the Beast Riders, they land in the city, and get an audience with Queen Anamoa of Onderon. Queen Amanoa is basically just an evil version of the English Queen, being old as hell and whatnot. She's also got a daughter who is like 18, so I'm presuming she was like 52 when she had her. Did you just not want kids until that late? Kinda bad for a royal dynasty. However, the Beast Riders break in to ruin everyone's day and kidnap the daughter Galia. So basically, the joining with the Republic is halted until they can get the Queen's daughter back. So the Jedi trio are sent out to rescue her. After crash landing their ship, they tame the beasts of Onderon, Bomas from KOTOR 2, which it's nice that they got the fauna of Onderon and Duxon right in that game. But anyways, this is really where I just soak up the references. Charging into the Beast Riders ceremony, in which Galia is to be married to leader of the Beast Riders' son Oren Kira, they show up uninvited. And Galia reveals that she didn't want to be rescued and has a real desire to marry Oren Kira. She reveals she staged the whole thing to unify the Royalty and Beast Riders on Onderon. Now that the Jedi understand what's really going on, they side with the Beast Riders and hop on over to Isis, in which Queen Amanoa is pissed. She detests the idea of reunification, and reveals that she's an adept in the dark side. This opens up a subplot in this entire series, so this was a good way of introducing it. Queen Amanoa's appearance really sells it. Basically, this whole situation resorts to violence, and the next few pages are an action sequence, until Master Archer Jeth shows up and quells the chaos. Queen Amanoa is killed. This is where the setup for the next volume is directly implemented. The remains of Frida Nad, a Sith Lord.
A Sith Lord?
Also in the chaos, Kay loses his arm. So now my thoughts. Looking past the nostalgia for KOTOR 2 and its references, I quite enjoy the first arc of Tales of the Jedi. Although it is quite short, it's 2 issues long, I feel like it should have been longer, because the story feels like it's going by too fast. Another thing I'd like to talk about is the art. It looks very vintage, like it's from the 1970s or something. I've been told that it was by design because they wanted to present it as an ancient legend sort of story, but I still don't like some of the art. Case in point, the following arc with Nomi Sunrider. Now, hearing that right off the bat, I can tell that Sunrider is a play on words on Skywalker because duh, instead of the sky, it's the sun, and instead of walking, it's riding. Anyways, Nomi Sunrider is set up as a Force-sensitive non-Jedi, married to a Jedi, and they have a daughter together named Vima, who doesn't really do much except be there for all but the final arc. Like, obviously she's an infant, so it makes sense. The first criticism goes to the questionable art style. Nomi looks weird as all hell. Her hair is stretched back and it looks really strange. The instigator for this arc is that Andor is killed in cold blood on orders from Boga the Hutt, who wanted the lightsaber crystal Andor had. I gotta say, we barely had any time to know Andor before he's killed off so easily. Might be one of the weakest Jedi in the history of Star Wars, and Nomi's horrified expression is nightmare fuel because it's badly illustrated. She picks up her husband's lightsaber and kills Boga's goons. The Force Ghost of Andor immediately shows up and instructs her to train with Jedi Master Thon. From here, I want to say that I really didn't enjoy this arc. Instead of being the classic Rocky training montage, it's just a drab slice of life story about Nomi training to become a Jedi, and it isn't as interesting as I'd like. I found this arc mostly forgettable, and don't remember much, aside from Nomi learning to become a Jedi, like her husband before her. I also gotta say that Nomi looks like generic vintage comic woman number 6. It's that generic of a look. And until later volumes, I was confused on what Nomi Sunrider actually looked like. I would have liked some more consistency. In fact, some characters in general have a generic look to them, and it's hard to tell what they look like if you adapted them to live action, for example. Nomi Sunrider's first appearance in general, I found to be largely underwhelming. It was also kinda boring. But when we move on to the second arc, the whole series picks up massively. I'm not even kidding. I suppose the series just needed some time to establish characters and the story, which is one of the hardest parts of writing a story. The Freda Nad Uprising, which, let me just say firsthand, what a ridiculous name for a Sith Lord, especially the surname. Nads are supposed to refer to the balls, don't they? Why is he called Freda Nad? The name was always weird to me anyways without that. Anyways, as the name suggests, there's an uprising inspired by the legacy of the Sith Lord. There's this cool looking motherfucker named Warb Null, who you can tell is just the flagship character of this volume. He's on the front cover. This guy is essentially like Darth Maul. He's there to be cool. If Tales of the Jedi was more mainstream, he would have sold all the toys in the world. This guy also has a grand entrance. He crashes a war machine in the Isa spaceport, and man, the way this is illustrated, this guy means business. This is really how you introduce the cool guy character. They grab the sarcophagus of Freda Nad and retreat to the war machine before going underground. Man, imagine what this would look like on screen. The newly crowned Queen Galia mentions her father and how he might be able to help with quelling the uprising. She mentions that her father has been on life support for years, and when you turn the page to the next scene,
what is that?
Yeah, we see this frail old weakling. This is King Omen of Onderon. This guy's so crippled from using the dark side too long that he requires cybernetics to survive. Then the story continues to go completely off the rails in a good way, with the spirit of Freda Nad showing up. Then King Omen reveals that he can move through his cybernetics. I gotta say that Tales of the Jedi from here on out is a breeze to read. The good guys are ambushed by the Naddus. To be honest, Warb Null kinda dies too soon when he's killed by Uliquel Joma. It's here where the Jedi realize they need backup, because the Naddus are a big hassle. We cut to Nomi Sunrider months beforehand, going to the Jedi Enclave on Ossus, and being fully initiated into the Jedi Order. She builds her own lightsaber, and then she is chosen to go on a mission to Onderon to back up Ulic Qel-Droma and crew. Her story lines up with Ulic's. The only criticism I have is that the structure is weird. It would have been better in the scope of the whole thing to do it in chronological order. First with Nomi Sunrider, and then with Ulic Qel-Droma and friends. We also see the setup for the next volume in motion, where two cousins, Seitul and Alimo Keto, travel to Coruscant, which is still in its pre-Phantom Menace look, and steal a bunch of Sith artifacts from a museum. These two are a power-hungry duo, intending to overthrow their elders. They hear about the drama going on at Onderon, and that's where they'll be able to unlock the secrets of the Sith. So the setup for the next volume is woven in with the largest story happening right now. With that, the Jedi Strike team are sent to assist the Jedi already on Onderon. Nomi Sunrider is knocked back during the battle against the Natus, and this is where she and Ulic first meet. Ulic sees an attractive young Jedi near him and comes to her aid. Meanwhile, the Cato cousins meet King Omen, and it's here where he makes an amulet for Seitul that allows him to read Sith texts, but then the Jedi show up to quell the uprising. While the Cato cousins flee, King Omen makes his final stand, until his mechanical support is cut off and he's stuck as a vegetable. The spirit of Freedom Nad gives the Cato cousins Omen stuff, and with that, the arc is completed. This part of the story was only 2 issues long, but it's really good. While there was a lot of setup for other stuff to happen later, the story was presented well. Lots of cool comic book action, and easily identifiable villains. King Omen, Warb Null, and Freedom Nad are all different and distinct from each other with their own gimmicks. Describing this arc is pretty hard beyond the fact that it's well written and presented, maybe because it was only 2 issues long. Then we move on to the third arc, Dark Lords of the Sith, in which it introduces us to fan favourite Exar Kun, the character I chose to have a custom Funko Pop made of, and there's a good reason for that. On top of being the origin of the double-bladed lightsaber, before Darth Maul, he has a very iconic design. Exar Kun is a frustrated Jedi in training, who wants to learn more about the Sith, but is neglected by his master Vodo. This addresses a common flaw with the Jedi. They close off the dangers of the Sith too much to their students because there will be those who will become too curious for their own good. Obviously, touching a dark side artifact is dangerous for a noob in the Jedi Order, but the Jedi must teach their students a way to never touch a dark side object. Ever. This is representative of why many Jedi fall to the dark side. Impatience and curiosity. Being told something is completely different to being shown something. Showing Sith atrocities would be enough to completely discourage Sith wannabes. Meanwhile, the Cato cousins arrive in their home system, the Empress Teta, and overthrow their family in the worst way possible. They turn a guy's tongue into a disgusting creature straight out of a horror movie, and turn everyone's swords into snakes that attack them. They have mastered the ways of Sith sorcery. These two are being as overly brutal as possible. Seitul's father is dipped into boiling hot molten carbonite and displayed as a trophy in the dining room, with the Cato cousins becoming the de facto dictators of their system, forming the Krath. Oh, that's where the namesake of the Krath sword came from in Knights of the Old Republic. I didn't realize that until now. We see plenty of these two being evil as all hell. They seal the mouths of their old tutor, and when he trips over, Alima incinerates him. From a presentation standpoint, it shows their incredible resort for cruelty. These two have absolutely gone off the deep end. Their motivations at the start were a bit iffy, but now we see that they intended to use the teachings of the Sith for evil, as is the way of the dark side. Meanwhile on Onderon, the Jedi just cannot get a rest, as now they're being informed that the heirs to the Teton throne took it prematurely and have become ruthless dictators. Master Archijeth sends Nomi Sunrider out to lead the resistance effort against the regime, while Ulic and his brother Kay decide to look around King Omen's Sith collection, since they were given a hint that the Cato cousins were on Onderon during the uprising. While searching through King Omen's stuff, Freedom Nad's spirit comes up once again with a near-future prediction. Ulick will become a conqueror against the Republic. And I love how they use this setup to cut back to Exar Kun. And it becomes evident that the other guy in question is about to go down the dark path. Now, stories in general don't take breaks, and I admire how these comics show us that a Jedi's work is never done. Even if there are no Sith around, Jedi have to settle disputes, investigate crimes, and generally be akin to space cops. This is how I hear Jedi of the prequels operate. I heard George Lucas has described how Anakin and Obi-Wan interact in Attack of the Clones as them doing another day on the job. While a dictatorship in one system doesn't sound as threatening as the Separatist movement, it shows how Jedi work endlessly to keep the peace. Anyways, Exar Kun is doing his lightsaber training, fighting one of his fellow classmates, Credo, who is a Cathar. Just wanted to point that out. He beats Credo for the 50th time in a row, and the cat-like Jedi claws Exar in their next duel, and Exar Kun is pissed. But before he can do anything, Master Vodo breaks them up. This leads to Exar directing his anger to his master. And man, do I just love how he picks up two sabers with that pose right there. This shows that Exar Kun is impulsive and on the clear path to falling to the dark side. He then goes to Onderon and directly interacts with Ulick's brother Kay, posing as a Jedi archaeologist. Archijeth easily sees through his lies, and Exar Kun has become obsessed with learning more about the Sith at this point. Meanwhile, Ulick Qel-Droma and Nomi Sunrider lead the effort to overthrow the Cato cousins' regime. Alima continues to use Sith sorcery to overpower the resistance defying her rule. She uses this to distract the Jedi, intending to direct away and have the upper hand. The direct conflict here is seeing through the illusions. With that being said, meanwhile on Onderon, two preachers are advocating for the Freda Nad uprising, and who should show up but Exar Kun. He's getting them to take him to Freda Nad's burial grounds. On the moon of Duxon, after slaying the beasts that guard the tomb, Exar Kun tries to cut through the wall into the tomb. After struggling for a bit, because it's made of Beskar, Mandalorian iron itself, he cuts through and the tomb of Freda Nad is his to explore. Shortly after, he is confronted by Freda Nad, and as I'm reading this, I am gripped closer and closer. I can say firsthand that Volume 3 really picks up the story in general. Freda Nad presents Exar Kun with two scrolls which he takes, and then he is betrayed by the preachers, whom he kills in anger. Slowly, he has become drawn closer and closer to the dark side. He killed the preachers instead of disarming them. It sounds so simple in concept to write, but I gotta say that this is so well done. Meanwhile, in the Battle of Empress Teta, Ulick and Nomi are tricked by the Krath, and Ulick is hit by some shrapnel. This comic, despite cutting often, is always on the move. The story is presented in such a tight-paced manner that you're heavily drawn in. Like, for example, Exar Kun at the end of issue 2 of this arc is landing on Korriban. It always makes you anticipate the next issue. Issue 3 elaborates that the mission on Empress Teta was unsuccessful, and both the Republic and the Jedi Knights were forced to flee, and are now taking an emergency meeting on Deniba. One of the few Jedi Knights not to attend the meeting is our boy Exar Kun. Exploring the Sith homeworld of Korriban, the spirit of Freda Nad begins to corrupt Exar Kun, and we see the gradual process, as Exar Kun is badly wounded by collapsing debris, with Freda Nad telling him that the only way to alleviate the pain is by giving in to the dark side. Exar Kun tries to reach out to his master, and his master, meanwhile, tries his hardest to buy his apprentice time through the Force, but he's only delaying the inevitable. After a short while, Exar Kun finally gives in, tapping into the dark side, and his strength suddenly returns. Every Jedi around the galaxy feels this moment in an instant. The Jedi on Deniba feel it, and Kun's master Vodo feels it. This is where you know some real shit is going down. Also, I'd like to mention that Credo is in love with another Cathar named Silvar, who is another supporting Jedi character. Keep in mind that there's a lot of supporting characters. Immediately after, the Krath send a barrage of deadly battle droids to ambush the Jedi. In the chaos, Master Archijeth is mortally wounded after saving Ulick Qel-Droma, and while the droids are taken out, Ulick watches as his master dies, becoming one with the Force. Meanwhile, of course, Exar Kun, despite tapping into the dark side, is still in denial that he has fallen. He realizes he can read Sith hieroglyphs now, and is further being pushed to use more of the dark side. When wild animals attack him, trying to use the light side now is useless and does absolutely nothing. Being coerced by Frida Nad, Exar Kun gives into his anger to help himself. Despite this, he is still in denial that he has fallen. This is all part of the fall to the dark side, either denying that you've turned or denying that you're doing anything wrong. This stuff might all sound like common sense to any Star Wars lore buff, but after seeing Disney misunderstand Star Wars countless times with their shitty movies and shows, it becomes a breath of fresh air to see something that's right on point. You really don't truly appreciate it until someone else fucks it up. With that being said, on Daniba, Ulic Queldroma is greatly saddened by the loss of his master. Nomi sits next to him and hugs him for comfort, and Ulic is determined to stop the Krath menace. He says that he will infiltrate the Krath from the inside. It's the idea he proposed earlier in the issue during the meeting before the battle droids came and killed his master. He's going through with it, knowing the huge risks abound. Meanwhile, after being told to go to Yavin 4, the iconic location from A New Hope, he was told that Naga Sadow, another ancient Sith Lord, hid out here after being defeated in a war from 1,000 years ago. Landing on the planet, he is ambushed by the Massassi and taken to one of the temples. I appreciate how they gave an overlooked planet from the original trilogy, known only for being the location of the rebel base, and gave it an interesting backstory, especially for the temple scene in the film. You see, this is what Disney canon should be trying to do instead of just retconning itself. Anyways, we've got Ulic Queldroma in his preparation for the mission, speaking to a Jedi Master named Odin showing a Sith holocron to Ulic as a cautionary tale. Those who tend to try to eliminate the dark side from within tend to become darksiders themselves. Ulic doesn't listen entirely, opting instead to try and get the mission over and done with. He says his goodbyes to his brother Kay and to Nomi, in which they share a kiss. This is all done to insinuate how Nomi has fallen in love with Ulic, but despite that, when she sees him again, he will be a changed man, going into uncharted territory in his efforts to stop the Krath. While it is a little on the nose on what's going to happen to Ulic, I don't have a lot of complaints about all this. Ulic's motivations make sense. He is dead set on stopping the Krath threat because he blames himself for his master's death. But it's clear that doing so, he will become the very thing he swore to destroy. But also, the alternative is an all-out war against the Krath, likely leading to many more casualties. And Ulic decides it's a risk he's willing to take. Destroy the Krath from the inside. I will say that the romance between Ulic and Nomi is sort of without proper development, but the reason I buy it is because of the time they spent together, up until this point, which has presumably been at least a few months. And there actually is plausibility in it, unlike these two. Cut back to Exar Kun tied up and freeing himself from his chains, and throughout the course of all of this, bending the Massassi to his will. Now, before he can gain absolute power by conquering the Republic, he has a threat to take care of, that being the reign of the Cato cousins. Along the way, he also tests one of the Sith artifacts he gets on Frida Nad, leading to his second death, as is the way of the Sith. Which leads us to Ulic, who snuck inside the Empress Teta system. The Cato cousins spotted him as soon as he came in, and so they host a public execution of some normal people who resisted their rule to draw him out. Since Ulic is here to destroy the Darksiders from the inside, he is forced to step in and save Alima when she is attacked and poses a defector. Sadal later injects Ulic with Sith poison, which will force him to truly embrace the dark side to wear off said poison. Again, the two cousins are brutal in how they conduct themselves. Alima and Sadal disagree on what to do with Ulic, and as I somehow suspected, Alima flat out seduces Ulic, and they become lovers. The trope of a manipulative woman using their attractiveness to deceive men is nothing new. When I was reading this, I felt this was so messed up. Alima is a brutal tyrant, and really doesn't mind doing anything to get away. And SJW would have never written Alima this way, because a woman using their body to manipulate others would be unthinkable to them, because they think it objectifies women and whatnot. Well, just like Githany, they realize to use their good looks to gain themselves an advantage. Well, with that being said, Nomi and Kay land in the capital city because Ulic is long overdue and they need to figure out what he's learned about the Krath. Nomi crashes onto the planet in an escape pod and lets herself be captured. Ulic is already on the dark path and agrees to kill her tomorrow at dawn. Well, still, Nomi knows how to get out of a jam and frees herself easily, contacting Kay and telling him that Ulic needs to be taken out of the madness, as he's gone really far into this. Despite the whole thing being a bad idea to begin with, again, it's reasonable to see why Ulic did it. Alima also takes out her cousin Sator with the assistance of Ulic, leaving her the sole dictator of the Empress Teta system. The Sith could never learn to share. Again, a breath of fresh air to see a story written by someone who understands Star Wars. When Nomi and Kay return to base, the Masters talk about how Ulic, if he has chosen the dark side, will bear the consequences of his actions. Again, it's very on the nose that Ulic is going to do something very, very bad, but this time, it's the dreadful anticipation for it. It's like playing a horror game with a jump scare that gets you every single time, and you are just dreading the moments building up to it. Nomi and Kay decide to free Ulic from the dark path again, as Exar Kun is also searching for the threat to his power. Nomi and Kay barge into the palace and try to get Ulic to come to his senses. Ulic is so far into his temptations that they aren't able to properly reason with him. Nomi tries to remind him the reason he's here to begin with. He did this to honor Arca Jeth, his master, and to destroy the uprising from within. But Ulic is extremely stubborn and doesn't listen. He's convinced himself that he's doing what he set out to do when in actuality, he's doing something completely different. I gotta appreciate the conflict here, with Nomi deciding to leave Ulic where he is, but Kay not wanting to, as he doesn't want to leave his brother with the dark side. It ultimately leads to the Jedi reluctantly leaving, with Ulic letting them off. The manipulative Alima congratulates him for choosing her over Nomi, and they embrace each other again, but who should show up but Exar Kun?
Hello there.
He blasts Alima away, and then it's a one-on-one between him and Ulic. The epic duel goes on for a bit, until a Sith spirit shows up. The spirit of Marka Ragnos, another ancient Sith Lord from long ago. He stops the both of them in their tracks and aligns the two. He cuts a hole in both of their foreheads and say that they will bring down the Republic together. Exar Kun has earned his place as Dark Lord of the Sith, while Ulic will be his rightful apprentice. And in the most badass page of this comic, Exar Kun and Ulic Qel-Droma, once enemies, slap the classic Roman handshake at each other, signifying their alliance. Alima wakes up to witness all of this. Exar Kun declares that they will cease to be enemies. They are now allies, and a new order for the galaxy awaits. And that concludes Dark Lords of the Sith. By now I am fully gripped into the story and thirsty for more. And I can say, in the next arc, the Sith War, nothing gets slowed down ever. We jump 6 months later, in which Ulic is challenged by Mandalore on a one-on-one. Like a lot of stories until Filoni established, the Mandalorians are a culture of warriors who always look to face the greatest foe. They start by giving the Empress Teta system a lot of shit, and when contacted, Ulic and Mandalore challenge each other to battle to the death. And if Ulic wins, the Mandalorians will serve him. And so they are at an agreement. Exar Kun, meanwhile, goes to Ossus hiding the fact that he has fallen from the light to recruit as many Jedi as he can and turn them to the dark side. Very sneaky, I must say. Don't let the enemy know that you're an enemy until they're already your friend. I like it. Ulic travels to Harkal to challenge Mandalore. The two viciously fight for a bit until Ulic comes out the clear winner, but he spares Mandalore, intending to use all the Mandalorians at his disposal. That's when you realize that both Ulic Qel-Droma and Exar Kun have their own special elite henchmen. Ulick has the Mandalorians, and Kun has the Massassi. Both are effective assets for their war against the Republic. I can't help but be compelled by the dynamic duo that is Ulick Qel-Droma and Exar Kun. It's almost as memorable as Revan and Malak, or hell, even Sidious and Vader. Exar Kun also takes a Sith holocron from an old Jedi Master, the previously mentioned Odin overpowering him easily and taking the holocron for his own usage. And of course, the other Jedi come in, and Exar Kun lies that the Jedi Master has passed on, but declared him a Jedi Master. Exar Kun will take them to Yavin 4 to show what he has in store. As well as this, Ulick attacks a Republic shipyard with the Mandalorians, gaining himself 300 new ships. Based on the evil expressions Ulick makes here, it's not hard to tell that he's gone off the deep end. Now he's truly forgotten what he set out to do originally. As such, the Republic managed to identify that Ulick Qel-Droma led the attack sometime later. And with that, Nomi and Kay on Coruscant, when relayed the news, only have 5 seconds to think about it, until Ulick attacks the heart of the Republic itself, immediately after attacking the shipyard. And on top of that, Exar Kun releases the Sith holocron on the Jedi he lured to Yavin 4, corrupting all of them to his cause. In his own words, he gave them the knowledge he promised. And this is my confirmation right here, that Exar Kun is perhaps one of the coolest Star Wars villains to ever grace the universe. A curious Jedi turned Dark Lord of the Sith is nothing unique, but it's just how Exar Kun pulls off his schemes that is just so effective. Many say that the villains a lot of the time are the most memorable, and I can certainly say that is the case here. Exar Kun is the main antagonist of the Tales of the Jedi storyline, I'd say. I can tell why he was mentioned a lot in Knights of the Old Republic. It wasn't just fan service, but his presence was everlasting. Meanwhile, during Ulick's offensive on Coruscant, he butchers Republic troops left and right. Alima seizes the opportunity to expand her own power by ordering the invasion force to retreat, while Ulick is cornered by the Jedi and captured with the intent of being put on trial for crimes against the Republic. We also see that Credo, Exar Kun's Cathar classmate from when he was still a Jedi, joined Exar Kun, yet joined him willingly instead of being directly corrupted. The way this is presented, the parallels perspectives of Ulick and Exar Kun make both equally important and gives them their own obstacles to overcome in conquering the Republic. Mandalore realizes after the retreat that Alima wanted to get Ulick captured so that she would acquire his power, including the loyalty of the Mandalorians. But since Mandalore swore his loyalty to Ulick, not her, he's not going to switch direct allegiances that quickly. At this part of the comic, it's where you realize Mandalore is a true mad lad. He will see his loyalty to Ulick Qel-Droma to the bitter end. He is hell-bent on finding some way to free his rightful master. Jesus, Mandalore the Indomitable may just be my favourite supporting character here. He's awesome. Meanwhile on Coruscant, Nomi and Kay rush over to Ulick's trial, and Ulick has refused to repent. He says that trying to stop his rising empire is like trying to stop an avalanche at the bottom of a mountain. You can see how visibly upset Nomi is, as Ulick's dark side tendency has driven her to tears. The comic has also established at this point that she no longer sees Ulick as the man she loves. Ouch. But who should show up mid-trial but Exar Kun and Mandalore, here to rescue Ulick. This sequence has me both gripped and saddened. How to describe it is that I half embrace the badass nature of Ulick and Exar Kun as a dynamic duo, but at the same time, see how tragic this all is. I think when it comes to the original trilogy purists, they saw Darth Vader as too much of a badass to see him as anything else, and thus hated Anakin in the prequels. I'm trying not to fall into that same trap. I think it's very cool that Exar Kun and Ulick Qel-Droma joined forces, but whether or not that was supposed to be seen that way, it's still a tragedy that Ulick and Exar Kun fell to the dark side, both with humble beginnings, but the lure of the dark side is difficult to resist. But with that being said, I don't want to fall into the trap of seeing characters one way based on impressions. But anyways, Master Vodo steps in during all this and faces his apprentice. Exar Kun, like Darth Maul in The Phantom Menace, pulls out his modified double-bladed lightsaber, and kills Vodo without remorse. Throughout the course of all of this, we see Ulic and Exar Kun stoop down to even lower levels of immorality. The dark side is like an addictive narcotic, and the Sith try their hardest to overdose on it without a break. This leaves Nomi, Kay, and Silvar in grief over their present circumstances. Ulic has fallen to the dark side and has joined forces with Exar Kun to take over the galaxy. Ulic spares them as throughout this storyline, he seems to not be able to simply kill them, which perhaps the path back to the light still exists, and that's what's gripping. There still is a visible enough path back to the light. So after talking to Mandalore, he informs him that Elima betrayed him, and Ulic is pissed. Ulic was always manipulated to do what she wanted, and so he comes up with a creative way to get rid of her. Meanwhile, Nomi and Silvar retreat to Ambria, where Master Thon resides. But once again, the Jedi are never allowed to take a break as Credo and Os Willem, another fallen Jedi, are sent to assassinate the Jedi Master. The character conflict here is extreme, because as I mentioned before, Credo and Silvar were lovers, but now they are on opposite sides. Credo is outmatched quickly and so he flees, distraught over his former lover. He returns to Exar Kun having failed, and Exar Kun decides he's expendable. He's going to send him on a suicide mission in which he will not return. Ulic also gets Elima to join the suicide mission, meaning that both Ulic and Exar Kun will get rid of their problems in one fell swoop. And it works. Both Credo and Elima attack the Republic at the Battle of Complex 9, and Elima uses a Sith artifact to rip open the nearby sun's core, but given the sun is near 9 other suns in an unstable fashion, it causes a chain reaction, destroying both the Republic and Jedi ships, and the Sith ship that Elima and Credo are on. So what do you think happens next? They die, realizing that Ulic and Exar Kun respectively led them into a trap to be disposed of. Now that's what you call the villain kills his own men cliche, done right. You want to get rid of treacherous or incompetent lackeys? That's how you do it. Ensure that their last moments are contributions to your goals. This makes me wonder how Vader, for example, should have gotten rid of Admiral Ozzel or Captain Needa. You should have just gotten rid of them in a way that benefited the Empire directly, instead of just wasting time choking them. Maybe you should have shoved Ozzel into an escape pod and launched him into the Rebels' shield generator at Echo Base. Anyways, with that victory secured, the Jedi are spread out, and Exar Kun intends to take all the Jedi knowledge from Ossus. Despite recovery efforts from the Jedi, most of the wisdom is taken by Exar Kun. As well as this, Kay pursues his brother Ulic, trying to get him to see reason, reminding him of the reason he went down this path in the first place, but Ulic will have none of it. Ulic and Kay duel each other, and it leads to a rage-filled Ulic murdering his brother. Through all the death and destruction, this makes Ulic finally realize his mistake. He killed his brother in anger, and it's his fault. He is immediately remorseful and guilty, holding his brother in his arms and crying. When I read this, I was like, Jesus Christ! It took a heinous deed that personal to bring Ulic back to his senses, at the cost of his brother's life. He killed his brother, and the consequences of his actions are entirely on him. I'd also like to mention that this is the cliffhanger to this issue, and what a way to get you to continue reading the series. Nomi Sunrider, out of pure instinct, uses the Wall of Light from earlier to block Ulic from the Force, yet the power is so effective that Ulic is permanently cut off from the Force. As described in stories like Heir to the Empire and KOTOR 2, losing your connection to the Force is like losing your connection to all of your senses at once. Despite Ulic being eliminated as a threat, the war is still ongoing. Mandalore attacks the city of Isis on Onderon, and after some brutal fighting, they are repelled to the moon of Duxon. And to those who played KOTOR 2, that's where you realize why there were Mandalorians on that moon. Mandalore the Indomitable is gone, but another warrior steps in to take his place, acquiring his mask and proclaiming himself the new Mandalore, ending their story in this series there. To be continued, in other words, in the KOTOR duology. Ulic meanwhile decides to help the Jedi to Yavin 4 to take out Exar Kun. In a joint attack, the Jedi attack Exar Kun, And this is the first and last time Exar Kun realizes he's outmatched, and so he decides on a backup plan to preserve his spirit. He self-sacrifices himself, causing his physical death, but his spirit to live on, inside the temple. Exar Kun and the Massassi are defeated at last, putting an end to this incarnation of the Sith threat. The surface turns to blazes, killing all on the surface. The arc ends around 2 years later. After Ulic completes a pilgrimage to his brother's gravesite, he visits the temple on Yavin 4. Since his connection was severed for the rest of his life, he senses nothing. All he can do is see the death and destruction he is majorly responsible for, and leaves. As it turns out, Exar Kun's spirit is trapped inside the temple. He tries reaching out to Ulic, but Ulic cannot hear him. And as Ulic leaves the temple, Exar Kun realizes he's trapped inside there for a long time. And for what I hear, he won't come into contact with anyone until after Return of the Jedi. That's a long, dreadful 4,000-year wait. With that, the Sith War is over, and like with any war, there's a lot of permanent damage, and Ulic has to live with what he's done. That concludes the Sith War volume. This arc really shows how things can get worse and worse for everyone involved. Ulic at the end seems to be the one suffering the most. He is no longer a Jedi or a Sith. He's done many terrible things, and on top of that, he can no longer feel the Force. Exar Kun isn't faring much better, being trapped for thousands of years. Now, for the rest of the Tales of the Jedi, there's 3 more volumes to go through. 2 are distant prequels, and 1 is a direct sequel to the Sith War. For the sake of all this, I will get into it in release order. So next we've got Golden Age of the Sith. This arc deals with events such as the Great Hyperspace War, loosely referenced in the loading screen of KOTOR. Well, here, we're about to find out what the Great Hyperspace War was. Right off the bat, some old or deceased characters from the main series appear here. Odin the Jedi Master who Exar Kun killed for his Sith holocron is shown here as a younger Jedi. He uses battle meditation, a power used to affect morale during a battle to demoralize pirates resisting the Tetan Empress. The first issue, titled Issue 0, because I suppose this is just supposed to be a prologue, also introduces 2 siblings, Gav and Jory Daragon. These 2 are basically a duo of explorers who come into contact with the wrong people, causing galactic events to go haywire. Their story starts with them owing money to several parties, one of which being Arba the Hutt, who is more compassionate than most of his species ironically. A merchant named Sis Kahor, probably butchered that name, puts a price on their heads. Some assassins come after them, but Odin and another Jedi, Mamet Nadel, fend them off, and the siblings flee to their now impounded ship, the Starbreaker 12, and make a random hyperspace jump. This is the setup for the batshit adventure they're about to go on. After making the jump to hyperspace, they end up in the worst possible location ever, Korriban, homeworld of the Sith. This is actually where we get some backstory for the Sith. Some dark side using Jedi were exiled long ago and landed on Korriban, coming into contact with the Sith species. After many generations, the Sith Lords are mostly on their world, detached from the rest of the galaxy. Since the Sith purebloods outweighed the Jedi exiles, most of the Sith today are hybrids with a tiny bit of human genes. Around the time the Daragon siblings make it to Korriban, the Dark Lord Marka Ragnos has died, and there is a funeral in his honor, led by Ludo Kresh, who intends to become the next Dark Lord. You want to know who else intends to become Dark Lord? His arch-rival, Naga Sadow. These 2 Sith butt heads with each other, constantly arguing and fighting with each other over who becomes the successor to Marka Ragnos. We also see that Arba the Hutt is pissed that the Daragon siblings stole the impounded ship and damaged his docks. He demands the 2 be punished, and the Tetan Empress tells him that if the siblings ever return to the system, they will be punished. As well as this, Odin and Nadel sense a premonition of something that will happen in the near future, coming from the Jedi exiles banished long ago. So far, I'm going to say that the backstory is well appreciated, but still, this story took 2 issues to get into. I suppose switching from Ulic Qel-Droma and surrounding characters to this took some time to adjust to the new storyline. I did certainly get the sense that the time of Ulic Qel-Droma and the Daragon siblings were very different from one another, as the latter live in a time with less hyperspace mapping. It did feel ancient compared to the time of Luke Skywalker. That was my impressions getting into the Hyperspace War prequel. Also, the Jedi aren't as prominent. I sort of feel like this storyline could have been called something else, because while the Jedi are in it, it's not a story particularly about the Jedi. The protagonists aren't Jedi, they're just two random siblings who land in Sith space. Speaking of, they land, offering peace and negotiations, and they are immediately captured and held for interrogation. Ludo Kresh and Naga Sadal very much disagree on what to do with the prisoners. Ludo Kresh simply wants to get rid of them, while Naga Sadal wants to use them to conquer the galaxy, as they can lead them back to the Republic. Kresh's decision to simply execute the both of them doesn't really go over too well with Sadal, so leading a strike team, he frees the Daragon siblings and killing all the guards and anyone who could become a witness, leaving behind Republic technology to convince the Council that the Republic military organized this attack. This leads to Naga Sadal soon after joining the meeting between the Sith higher-ups. He uses the opportunity to suggest attacking the Republic first, and most of the Sith are behind him. Ludo Kresh still wants to be Dark Lord though, and so he refuses to submit to Naga Sadal's rule. This causes a split in the Sith Empire. As well as this, Naga Sadal keeps the two siblings separated, intending to take Gav as his apprentice, teaching him Sith magic and the like. He orders another attack on the Kresh, this time on the impounded Starbreaker 12, again framing it as a Republic attack. But this time, during the investigation, Ludo Kresh manages to figure out it wasn't a Republic attack at all. Rather, it was Naga Sadal who executed this as a false flag attack. The conflict here, I found to be certainly compelling, as Naga Sadal and Ludo Kresh are at each other's throats, trying to one-up the other, as is the infighting way of the Sith. I like the direct taste of what happens when Sith leaders can't agree on the successor. As well as this, by now, Gav and Joria are well enough established characters. They aren't really that different in personality, at least from what I notice, but I still remember the two individually. With that being said, an enraged Ludo Kresh attacks Naga Sadal. He tells Jory that she needs to flee on her ship for her own safety, but as it's revealed, his real plan is to track her ship to the Republic and invade the galaxy, while he's still got Gav as his apprentice. I like this plan from a logistical standpoint. You hit two birds with one stone. With that being said, that's the end of Golden Age of the Sith arc. I don't really have much to say about it, but that's only because it's like trying to describe why a machine is working correctly, rather than why it won't work. It's not as easily describable, but I say this arc is good. It gives a lot of backstory to a lot of things, including the Sith itself. It introduces Sith purebloods, showing us that the Sith started as a race rather than a faction of Darkseid users directly. I also noticed a while ago that none of the Sith Lords used the Darth title. Based on my understanding, Darth relates to a Rakardan phrase Dar-Tar, which means Conqueror of Death, and it seems Revan and Malak, who went into direct contact with the Rakata, were the first to use the Darth title. I may be wrong about that though. While KOTOR is a story for another time, I like to say that Golden Age of the Sith answers a lot of questions about the Sith in general. I mean, the volume is called Golden Age of the Sith, so it better have some important information. I'm also really impressed that they managed to come up with a lot of unique names, similar to how George Lucas came up with the names of Star Wars to begin with. The Old Republic was uncharted territory back in the 90s, so I got to appreciate all the names the writers managed to come up with. Anyhow, I think we should move on to the next arc, the Fall of the Sith Empire. It starts with Jory making it back to the Empress Teta system. She is then immediately arrested for all the illegal shit she pulled with Gav at the start. She tries to warn everyone about the Sith threat, but no one believes her. Arbor the Hutt, feeling betrayed, doesn't listen to her either. In short, all he says is,
"Don't talk to me! Don't talk to me, criminal!"
Back in Sith space, Sadal tricks Gav into pressing a button that fires turrets into Ludo Kresh's flagship when he tries to attack them. Man, Naga Sadal was a trickster, ain't he? He manipulates anyone and everyone to serve his needs. Sort of like another Sith Lord we all know and love. Jory, meanwhile, during sentencing is sent to a labor camp, but she very quickly escapes, taking a shuttle. She decides to take her warning directly to the Tetan Empress herself. She literally jumps out of a shuttle with a parachute and makes it to the Empress's palace. She quickly relays the warning to the Tetan Empress, and now there's someone who believes her. Given that Empress was told all about this with the premonition with the Jedi, they realize she's serious now. But they don't have a lot of time to prepare for the Sith invasion, as it's coming very, very soon. Gav, meanwhile, is coerced into invading the Republic. To be honest, the whole thing with Gav never sat right with me. He's pretty much becoming an invader of the galaxy on a whim, and this all started for completely different reasons. This sort of thing is extremely crazy. I don't know whether or not to criticize it for being batshit, or to praise it for being batshit. This all started because of a random jump to hyperspace. I suppose since I always praise the expanded universe for being out there and exciting, I suppose it would be the latter. Anyways, during the ground invasion, Gav comes right into contact with Arbor the Hutt, who is equally angry at him than he is with his sister. One of the Sith soldiers kills the Hutt, and this leaves Gav in tears. Also, in the worst possible moment, Jory shows up, having been given a proto-saber by one of the Jedi. The two siblings are now split with each other, Gav having unwittingly joined an invasion on the Republic, and Jory assisting the opposite side. Gav, being guilt-stricken, flees and goes back into space. The comic, I can say here, is extremely batshit. Showing out all-out war between the Sith Empire and the Republic is extremely overwhelming on the first read. A lot of well-drawn spectacle for the eyes to digest. But after processing what's going on, I have to wonder if Filoni's ever going to match the standards of something like this. This all leads to Gav's self-sacrifice. He decides in his last moments to inform the Republic that the Sith homeworld has been left undefended, but soon after, Naga Sadow launches a solar weapon or something, and again, I can hardly keep up with the crazy nature of this story. Point is though, Gav dies in a blaze, and he says his final goodbyes to his sister Jory. Naga Sadow is then confronted with the still-alive Ludo Kresh, revealing that he faked his death, and intending to take him down. The distraction weakens Naga Sadow's fleet. While Sadow ultimately defeats Kresh, the Republic shows up a split second later, giving Sadow's fleet no time to recover, and fires upon them, destroying all but one ship in the fleet. Naga Sadow flees in shame with the Massassi, and hide in the Yavin system, explaining why there were Massassi there. The Great Hyperspace War is over, and Jory, having survived this whole ordeal, decides to reopen Arbor's repair dock, as it's probably the least she could do to make it up to the Hutt posthumously. So in general, this, and Golden Age of the Sith, was extremely creative and out there. This is how you do sheer insanity. The story starts as something normal in the Star Wars universe, and devolves into a war between the Sith Empire and the Republic. And there's so many turns in this story that I can't believe my eyes. They came up with the most bizarre ideas imaginable, and put that in the comics. I think it actually fits too with the rest of the expanded universe. The EU was never one to shy away from crazy ideas and presentation. The Force Unleashed is only a small crumb of the rest of the EU. While it is strange that two siblings making a random jump to hyperspace is the catalyst for this arc, it does play into the story structure concept that something normal turns into something bizarre. So with that being said, we've got one more arc before the conclusion, that being the direct sequel to the main storyline. Redemption is set 10 years after the Sith War, and shows the general aftermath of all the characters like Ulic Qel-Droma and Nomi Sunrider after the Sith War. We see that Ulic is depressed, feeling incredible guilt over his actions, and not very talkative to the Spacer trying to find him some housing. He sees Yavin 4, or what's left of it, after Exar Kun's defeat. As well as this, we see that Nomi's daughter Vima, now a teenager, is a frustrated and rebellious girl who wishes to become a Jedi, but her mother is very distant, concerning herself mostly with politics. We also see that Silvar is extremely bitter after the loss of her mate, Credo, and the fact that Ulic is an unpunished war criminal. She says that since the Cathar only love one partner in a lifetime, and she lost Credo, she has dedicated herself only to the Jedi and the Force. We also see that Tot Danita handles domestic issues back on his homeworld on Ryloth. The galaxy, despite moving past the Sith War, cannot fully get over it. Ulic settles on a fortress on Renvar, and that's where you realise why Battlefront used Renvar as a map, as it's prominently featured in this comic. The instigator for this comic is the impatient Vimar, sick and tired and bored and whatnot, to be trained as a Jedi, decides to seek Ulic Qel-Droma out to train under him. In the earlier comics, Vimar was simply there, I suppose. She was mostly Nomi Sunrider's daughter and whatnot, but she becomes her own character in this arc. Vima is a naive girl, full of spirit and seeking out Ulic because she sees something in him that all the adults can't. She pays the spacer that brought Ulic to Renvar, and he takes her there. She hikes over to Ulic's hideout on the planet, and when she comes into direct contact with him, she asks that he train her. Ulic, of course, ain't interested. And this all reminds me of The Last Jedi, only difference being that it's good. I said that Luke Skywalker was not the right character to turn into a pathetic, dirty, homeless man. Rian Johnson should have made up his own character if he wanted to go that far with what he did with The Last Jedi in general. Why it works for Ulic Qel-Droma and not Luke Skywalker is simple. Luke Skywalker is an inspirational hero. That's what he was designed as. J.J. Abrams and Rian Johnson just pulled a complete 180 on this character when the sequel trilogy was made. Also, Ulic Qel-Droma actually got a proper transition and development to what he's doing now. Luke just became Jake Skywalker overnight between movies without building up to it. There's also the fact that they didn't cushion the blow. They went for the most blunt and offensive approach ever right off the bat. And that's part of why the audience didn't accept it, on top of it being blatant character assassination. With that simple explanation out of the way, I'd also like to mention that Ulic reluctantly decides to train Vima in the ways of the Force, although he can't demonstrate the power because his connection has been severed. You can also see, based on how the artist drawn him, that there is a stark contrast between him and Vima. Vima is a soul beaming with life, while Ulic is just empty and depressed. They really sold this stuff through presentation. It's shown that Vima is an attentive and hardworking student, building her own lightsaber and whatnot. Ulic, despite all this again, is depressed and empty. Nomi decides to track down Ulic to get her daughter back, but Silva, still angry and resentful to Ulic, decides she wants to kill him. She gets the before-mentioned spacer to take her to Renvar, and after some tracking down, Nomi comes to get her daughter back. And this page where Ulic and Nomi stare at each other is incredibly awkward, yet perfect at the same time. Shows that they have not seen each other for years. They both have a blank stare at each other. Silva, interested in revenge meanwhile, drops into Renvar and goes to attack Ulic. Ulic by this time has learned to come to terms with his guilt, and insists Silva do the same. Ulic decides to let himself become one with the Force, in a similar fashion to Obi-Wan in A New Hope. But Silva at the last minute decides she can't go through with it. But then the spacer from behind shoots Ulic Qel-Droma dead. He exclaims that he's achieved some great feat, killing a war criminal, and that he can't wait to tell everyone at the cantina. Silva tells him to fuck right off and to get lost. And so Ulic, now reaching his end, finally becomes one with the Force. He surprisingly vanishes in a Jedi fashion, and all is resolved with the past. Okay, so to be honest, I found the spacer stepping in and killing Ulic to be a bit of a moment that took me out of the story, but aside from that, I don't have any complaints. It's the perfect aftermath story. Ulic trains Vima in the ways of the Force and dies redeemed from his sins. Now that's how you end a story. Take notes, fools who wrote the sequel trilogy. So that was Tales of the Jedi. I went through this whole thing, beginning to end, read every issue, every storyline, and after deep assessment, I can say that Tales of the Jedi is great. Entering uncharted territory is never easy, and the bedrock for the Old Republic was well handled. Well done to the writers. I saw more than just additional add-ons to Knights of the Old Republic. Tales of the Jedi is a good story in its own right. Honestly, it can be read before or after playing KOTOR, and you'll be left fulfilled either way. These comics made a lot of new characters from scratch without references to everything in the original trilogy 50 times over. This story does have fan service through recurring dialogue, but the story built its own identity. It's a problem a lot of the Disney era content really struggles with. The premise doesn't sound too inciting at first, hearing that none of the characters from the original movies will make an appearance, but it's a risk that ends up panning out. As the prelude to Knights of the Old Republic, I have to give Tales of the Jedi credit where it's worth. I would certainly recommend Tales of the Jedi to any fan of KOTOR. Bobby Fat pajama wearing arse clowns probably not, because they're only interested in stuff in close proximity to the original trilogy. But I'm not one to appease those idiots, so overall, I give Tales of the Jedi an 8.8 out of 10. Some stories took some time to get into, but when you're drawn in, it's a blast. So with that being said, I made sure to make this video before Filoni's cheap Ahsoka-filled Chinese knockoff comes out. I don't expect to ever be impressed by the upcoming show than I do the original comics. I'd love to be surprised, but knowing Filoni, he fails to impress, unless you're a super casual Star Wars fan. Like, the show will not be all about Ahsoka, but she's a prominent part of it. I can't help but just be fucking sick of her. We've seen enough of her. Not to mention there's a live action series coming out about her. Just stop it. Make a new mascot, Filoni. Well, that's my complete review of Star Wars Tales of the Jedi, the real version. I'm JJ Plagiarisms. And until next time, what are Mystery Boxes? Water was